Ah, Crash Bandicoot. Never in my lifetime have I played such a consistent game. Oh. Oh god, it's... Stop it, Crash. Your tattoos are stupid! Okay, it's no secret that as the series progressed, Crash has become steadily worse, less relevant, and seemingly has become a relic of the 5th generation of consoles. But damn it, back then he was king. Crash, along with arguably Mario 64, basically laid down the groundwork for the modern 3D platformer at a time where every goddamn developer was trying to blatantly copy the animal mascot trope in an attempt to recreate Sonic the Hedgehog's success. Crash stood out somehow. It may be because his game was actually, I don't know, decent? Yeah. Needless to say, every PS1 Crash game, in my opinion, is an absolute gem. Yes, even the Mario Party knockoff, and especially the Mario Kart one. Alright, so I admit, I have a huge nostalgia boner for Crash, and I may be a little bit biased to these games, but you know what? I don't care. So it was a massive shame that as soon as Naughty Dog took off and left the Bandicoot to these guys, that the series quality dropped so drastically. Before I get down to Twinsanity, it's only fair I talk about the game preceding it, The Wrath of Cortex.
Crash Bandicoot, The Wrath of Cortex.
Yeah, what he said. As it stands, the game's extremely bland in my eyes, and does little to change the formula from the third game in the series, Warped. The levels just feel uninspired. There's nothing particularly bad about them, but it lacks the charm of the original games and isn't significant enough in terms of evolving Crash to the 6th generation of consoles. Plus, the loading times. Dear God, the loading times. I mean, this isn't exactly Sonic 06 levels of horrendousness, but it cuts pretty damn close. In summary, it's just kind of meh. Nothing offensively awful, but simply mediocre and a title not worthy of Crash Bandicoot. So it was a huge surprise to find out that the next game, Twinsanity, was actually the exact opposite. It was maybe a little too different from the standard formula for most people, and I think Twinsanity's new concepts and altered level design further alienated a lot of players who were already on shaky ground with the subpar Wrath of Cortex. So what do I think? Well, the better question is why should you care, but I don't know, I think it's actually kind of good. And I guess this is my haphazard way of explaining why. I guess naturally I'll start off by talking about the plot. The game starts out with the dastardly Dr. Cortex trying once again to rid of that damn Bandicoot. He does this by dressing in drag, of course, and leading him to an arena filled with all of Crash's previous foes. Needless to say, the plan fails, and through a series of developments, Crash and Cortex are forced to team up to defeat two interdimensional birds hell-bent on revenge and to destroy the universe as we know it. As you can probably tell, the plot is certainly more off the wall than previous Crash Bandicoot games. And that's saying quite a lot considering Crash has never been really that grounded in reality. This is due in part to the writers, who are of Ren and Stimpy fame, and the writing really does come through. There are much more comedic moments, mostly at the expense of Cortex, was been homogenized to an extent, and humour may put some people off. And I will admit the writing isn't terribly consistent, but I think it creates enough charm to separate it from the previous games and give it a little more personality. As a result, the game has a much more cartoony vibe, and this really comes through in the game's visual design. Is that a segue I hear? No, I guess not. Let's talk visual design. The game looks good. Not great, but decent enough I feel, and a definite improvement over Wrath of Cortex. The animations are definitely more fluid and give off the animated style reflected in the script. The environments are also decently designed. There are some blatant tropes here and there, but there are also some pretty cool ones, such as an underground crystal mine, the lair of Crash antagonist N. or even an academy for evil geniuses. Overall, the presentation is certainly different from previous installments, and for that I commend it. It might be a little divisive with some people, but I think we can all agree it looks better than this. This wasn't a good idea. So the presentation is solid in my eyes. But as we know, sometimes it means little if the gameplay is simply god-awful. So, let's take a look. Twinsanity's level design also differs greatly from the classic titles, and in a lot of ways, reflects Jak and Daxter more in terms of structure. Gone are the warp rooms, and instead we are given a more narrative-driven level structure. While I personally have a preference for the warp rooms as it takes you straight to the action, I can appreciate the differing style here. All the levels have a slightly more connected feel, and the plot really does help to make the progression feel quite natural. The levels are also slightly more open. Don't get me wrong, it's still a very linear game with clear objectives, but they give you more breathing space and throw in more collectibles to give you an incentive to explore. I guess now I should explain the multiple gameplay styles, in which there are 4. Crash in this game controls fairly similar to previous ones.
but feels a little lighter. As such, the physics may put some people off, particularly people who are fans of the PS1 games, but it isn't really as bad as something like Sonic 4, for example. Along with that, we have the team dynamic gimmick with Crash and Cortex. It controls pretty similar to Crash's gameplay, but now you move slower and can fling Cortex around like a loaded plastic bag. Essentially, it allows for a little more puzzle platforming, but it's not particularly deep or rewarding. They avert the blandness of that gameplay by trying to introduce set pieces, such as a rollerball section, a portion where Cortex has brain damage and is being chased by bees, and a chase section where you ride Cortex like a snowboard. These portions are okay, but overall the team dynamic isn't that interesting. I didn't really think it was fully taken advantage of. Next up we have Cortex's solo gameplay, which is, quite frankly, awful. It's essentially a shoot 'em up portion in which the player has the use of a horrible auto-aim system and to be at the same time extremely slow. Also, corridors. Too many gosh darn corridors. Thankfully you don't play as him a lot, but when you do, it really drags. The last gameplay style features new character Nina Cortex, Cortex's niece who is a student at the Academy of Evil. She controls pretty similar to Crash's gameplay style, except for her weird steampunk grapple arm thingy. She reminds me a little of the Werehog, to be honest. Except, you know, not shit. Nina's actually fairly decent in terms of controls, but you never play as her much, so she never really gives off much of an impression. So overall, the gameplay might be a little bit of a mixed bag, especially since the levels themselves, while good looking aesthetically, are simply a little too straightforward. I can commend the developers for trying to add variety to the game, but they should have focused on refining the core platforming, which, to be fair, is the best part of the game, but it could have just been a little bit better. Before I close off the review, I'll briefly comment on the music, which is, well, let's just say if you like the wahs and bars of the new Super Mario games, you'll feel relatively at home. It's completely a cappella, which I admit I'm not the biggest fan of. I feel it's a little too obnoxious and kind of distracts me when I'm making precision jumps. The tracks are fairly short too, so they loop quite often, so I got sick of some songs real quick. But hey, music is basically down to preference, so I guess you'll just have to kind of decide for yourself. In summary, Twinsanity is an oddball of a game, and it's no real surprise that it received a fairly mixed reception with fans and critics alike, which is a shame, because as I said, I feel Twinsanity has a lot to offer in terms of gameplay, and has a little more thought and effort put into it than the game before it. I recommend that people who are perhaps a little apprehensive with some of the changes, particularly nostalgia-ridden PS1 fans such as myself, at least try it out. If you go into it with an open mind, you might be pleasantly surprised. That said, I'm Zealous Zombie, and this has been another Zealous analysis. I'll see you next time.